Hello and welcome to Metabolic Mastery, brought to you by Core Medical Technologies. I'm Dr. Marc Humbert, and this is Dr. Cameron Garber. Today we are going to talk about fast versus slow metabolisms. What's the truth? What are some myths? And what's important in all of that? And so I think to start out, let's talk about why metabolism matters.
Well, I mean, honestly, I get asked that question all the time of like, do I even have a metabolism anymore?
It's just, it ran away. It's
gone. It's gone. So is it fast? Is it slow? People have a lot of questions about metabolism and what it is. And many misconceptions and things about what metabolism really is and means and things. The best way that I can sum it up is your body has a lot of different things going on all the time. And most of those things require energy to fuel it. So you have processes that build your body up, and you have some processes that break your body down. And then you're also using calories as energy to fuel movement and activity and exercise and things like that. The sum total of all of the energy used in the building up and breaking down processes and in movement and activity, that's your metabolism. Is that track?
Well, and I think that's a good way to look at it, because I think that we just think, oh, metabolism, that has to do with my weight. And it's not just weight, it's everything. It's literally, how is my body working?
Yeah.
How is it getting its stuff done?
Yeah. So it really isn't tied to weight that much, other than the fact that if we have a surplus of calories in, so the precursor to creating energy, right? The fuel source of energy. If we have too much fuel, then we store some up. And so that's really the relation there. But really, my metabolism is functioning whether I have a excess or a surplus of calories, or if I have too little.
If I'm alive, I have a metabolism.
Right, yeah, exactly. It's still functioning regardless of your diet or anything else. So your metabolism really is just the things keeping your body alive. And so everyone has a metabolism. Yes, you still have a metabolism. And so it's, people always ask, is mine fast or slow or things like that? And it's like, doesn't really matter. It's more about where is your body at and what can we do to optimize for that. And that's why, again, getting it tested, buying the equipment. If you're a clinician, gym owner, a dietitian, anybody that's helping people in a health and wellness space, trying to make lifestyle changes, being able to have the equipment to test people is so vital, because knowing where somebody's metabolic rate is going to give you a lot of information on, is what I'm doing working? What is the impact of what we're trying to do on their metabolism? And if so, or if it is making the impact that we want, great, then we can keep moving forward. If it's not having the impact that we want, then we need to keep switching things up. So I think as a vital sign, getting that resting metabolic rate and your exercise metabolic rates, dialing in your zones, things like that, are so critical to being accurate in whatever your exercise or dietary prescription is. And so, there's my plug for doing metabolic testing.
Yeah.
So important. And obviously you probably wouldn't be listening to this podcast if you're not interested in metabolic testing.
Fair point.
But it is something that really can make such a difference in the way that you interact with your patients or clients, and allows you to have so much more power in your suggestions to them, because it's coming from a place of science and of seeing where their body is at, so that recommendation you're making is based on them individually. We talk a lot about precision medicine.
Yeah.
In my estimation of things, metabolic testing really is precision medicine at its finest. Finding out where someone's metabolism is. Again, our whole body is designed around processing food into energy, into the building blocks that we need. That's our metabolism. And like everything we do kind of revolves around putting food on the table, eating, and we rarely test that system to see, is that functioning optimally. So getting a metabolic test done really does help us to know, is that functioning the way we would want it to? Is that changing the way we would want it to based on what we're trying to do with our health? And so it just gives you so much insight into someone's health by measuring their metabolism.
Absolutely. Well, and like you said, knowing those actual numbers, right? What's happening in my body real time. Mm-hmm. One thing that I want to have you talk about real quick is, how does having that information, because the nice thing is the data doesn't lie, right? We know exactly what's going on. How does that put you on the same side as the client? Because I think that's one of the difficulties sometimes is in this kind of, I want to get healthier frame, it pits, or people feel like they're pitted against the clinician. How does having this data actually help you be on the same side?
Right. Well, I mean, nobody likes to be corrected. Nobody, we don't all take coaching well, right? And so oftentimes when a coach is speaking down to us, when they're telling us that we've done things wrong, that's very hard to take. What I love about this metabolic information is we don't have to tell people that they've done things wrong. People will often say that, oh, so I've been exercising wrong my whole life, or I've been eating wrong my whole life. It's like, no, it's not about wrong. It just wasn't lined up with the outcome that we were looking for. And so instead of using the information to, beat them over the head with it and be like, yeah, you're overweight and out of shape and blah, 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 you can stand side by side with them and be like, okay, here's what the data is saying. And based on this, like, here's just the changes we need to make. And so we can blame the data instead of blaming the patient or the patient blaming us. I love that about it because it allows us to be more on their side instead of beating them up about it. And so looking at that metabolic data allows us to be like, okay, things still aren't working maybe the way we'd like it to. Let's make some adjustments here and here and here, instead of being like, are you really eating as many calories as we think? Are you really, we often kind of tease that a metabolic test, the resting metabolic test in particular, is a good lie detector. Are people really doing what we say? But again, you wouldn't say that to the patient. You're not going to call them out like that. Instead, it's like, okay, I know you've probably eaten a lot more protein than you were used to eating, but it's still not quite enough, and the numbers reflect that. So let's keep going in that direction to try to get more protein in, or whatever it is that, whatever behavior we're trying to change. It allows me to be able to be more of a friendly coach instead of a talk down to them coach.
Yeah. It was really building a foundation of trust versus suspicion. Mm-hmm. And that can make all the difference. And having that data, like you said, is just so nice, because when relying on some of the equations, not bad, like it can get you in the ballpark, but it's easier to say, oh, like, were you really eating the way that we talked about? There's actually quite a bit of variability in all of the metabolic equations. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit, but they can be anywhere from 10 to 30% off, which when we're talking about kind of dialing in that precision medicine, that can just add a lot more uncertainty into the equation.
Yeah, and that's a big number, honestly. So when you're talking numbers in the thousands, 10% is a fairly big number. 30%, it's a huge number, right?
Absolutely. So I want to talk real quick about kind of the components that make up our metabolism, that make up our energy expenditure.
Yeah.
And so we have a few main components. So what Cameron alluded to is our resting metabolic rate. Fairly synonymous with basal metabolic rate, just a little bit different in how we test that.
Yeah.
But for all intents and purposes, you can kind of think about that as the same. We've got our physical activity, right? So what am I doing for exercise? We've got our non-exercise physical activity, also called NEAT. And then we've got what's called TEF, so the thermic effect of food. So it costs us some amount of energy to liberate the energy from food. If that makes sense. And so the RMR makes up the biggest proportion of that, but then NEAT is also a really huge part of that. And it's kind of, in terms of changing our body composition, it's kind of one of the unsung heroes. We tend to look a lot more at exercise activity. And while exercise is important for so many reasons, when we're looking at metabolism, like, it just doesn't have as big of a contribution. So anyway, we've got our total energy expenditure, we've got resting metabolic rate, we've got NEAT, we've got exercise activity, and then we've got the thermic effect of food. And so that kind of gives us a foundation. And so with that, let's address some of the myths around fast or slow metabolism. So that is a question that you get asked all the time, right?
So often.
Is I know my metabolism's slow, or is my metabolism slow, or I used to have a fast metabolism back in my 20s, and then everything changed. So what's going on here?
There's so many things that can be going on there. So, digestion plays a role in that. Are we getting as many calories out of the same amount of food that we're eating, or all kinds of things? Honestly, more often than not, it's not that people's metabolism slowed down as much as their activity levels slowed down. So that NEAT portion, right, their non-exercise activity thermogenesis, that's usually what slows down more than anything else. It's like I've gone on the same 4-mile walk every day for 40 years, but the last 10 years, I feel like it's just not working the way it was, and blah, blah, blah. And a very common story. Well, it's probably that everywhere else in your life you've slowed down a little bit. Since then, you've retired. Since then, you've, taken different things off your plate and not done as many activities and things that you used to do. And so your non-exercise activities have diminished quite a bit. And we'll see that reflected in how many steps they're taking, and in how many, you can even look at it in how big their social circle is and how many activities they participate in, how many, appointments they'll take in a day. Oftentimes with older adults, you'll find that they'll only take 1 or 2 appointments in a day because their capacity to handle that has decreased over time. And so their day just isn't as full with being busy. And so they're taking fewer steps. They're doing fewer activities. They're having fewer mental processes of figuring things out and problem solving. And so their non-exercise activities are so much less that's actually a lot of where, weight gain happens with certain phases of life as they change, is not that we're eating more or eating worse or things like that. Oftentimes we're just not moving as much. And so we're not turning on the engine and running the car as much, so we're not burning up as much fuel. And so when we look at it from a resting metabolic rate, the amount of calories needed to keep everything going in the background is about the same, but then we're just not using as many calories throughout the day. And so then if we're putting in the same amount of fuel, but burning fewer calories, we're gonna have that surplus. And so that's a lot of what happens when we see somebody's metabolism slow down. It's actually that their lifestyle slowed down.
I think that's such a great point. So there's some recent research by Herman Ponzer. So he looks at energy expenditure across the human lifespan. Mm-hmm. And obviously it makes sense in early life, that's raised just because there's a lot of growth and activity there. But then from age 20 to age 60, metabolism stays remarkably stable. So little fluctuations, but pretty stable. Past age of 60, it starts to drop. Most of that is accounted for by losing lean muscle mass, which we know is a huge problem as people age. But I found that remarkable is that people tend to think like, oh, my metabolism's just so much different than it was when I was 20. And really, like, things stay about the same, but those other areas change, right? How much am I moving? How much am I eating, right? So it's like often food doesn't stay the same, food increases and activity decreases. Mm-hmm. And that ends up being a huge problem. Like, how many people do you know that, did a ton of sports or other activities in their 20s and just had an appetite like crazy, and then they stopped doing all of that and appetite didn't change?
Right. Well, so interestingly, one of my favorite, I don't know if I can call it favorite, one of the saddest sometimes questions to ask people, but most telling questions, is to ask them 2 things. One, when was the last time that you ran? Mm. And oftentimes, you'll have people tell that the last time they actually ran was like in their 20s. You're talking to an 80-year-old and they haven't run for 50 years or more. And that it's very telling. It's like, okay, that's part of why your metabolism slowed down. When was the last time that you sprinted? So even for runners that are struggling to, I've been running for years and years, but it's not working for me anymore. I'm starting to put on weight and things like that. And it's like, well, when was the last time you really sprinted, like went all out? Yeah, it's been a while. Those types of things we do as kids and young adults all the time. We do them without even thinking about it.
Yeah.
Right? And as we get older, we stop doing some of those, especially the higher level, higher end activities. We don't sprint, we don't run as much, we don't roll down a grassy hill just because that looks fun.
Do the like spin on the swings?
Yeah, the spin on the swings, the chasing somebody down. We don't play tag. We don't, a lot of those things we just stop doing because they're not age appropriate anymore. But really, those are the things.
Not age appropriate.
Yeah. Well, and so then we age, right? And so much of aging and slowing our metabolism down and things like that really is more lifestyle than it is the effects of our biology changing. And so much of what we can do to preserve that is still do the things that we did when we were young. The way to stay young is to do young things.
Yeah.
And so sprinting, running, lifting heavy things, all of those activities that we used to do, keeping doing those is going to keep us young.
Yeah. Well, we have talked so many times about my grandma, right?
Yeah.
I lived till she was 95, and she was a spitfire. She was amazing. She was always active, and it was fascinating because the older she got, she would have more and more people saying, "Oh, you just got to sit down, right? Let us take care of this.
Don't
you don't have
that.
to do that. Don't
yeah.
do that." She didn't listen to them, and so she just kept moving. She kept doing things, right? She didn't just let her activity drop. She was still active in her community, active with friends, active with family, and it showed.
Right.
She stayed very healthy up into when she passed, and it was this very, very short period between when she got sick and when she passed away. Mm-hmm. And I think so much of that is attributable to how did she live her life and how was her lifestyle set up to support movement, to support activity. Mm-hmm. And so that makes such a huge difference, right? Even though she was older age-wise, her quality of life was still so expansive, and she could keep up for a good portion of the time with the kids, right? Like still doing somersaults and stuff and leg wrestling. She's a master leg wrestler. Until she was in her like late 80s. And so pretty cool. And so it's I think looking at how do I architect my environment so that it selects for those healthy activities. When we're kids, it's way easier, like you mentioned. It's like I'm doing sports, I'm in school, I have this prescribed way of living, mm-hmm. and it supports movement. And then as we get into college and beyond, and careers and kids, our opportunities for movement tend to decrease, our environment changes. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the really important things to understand is that people will feel bad a lot of times, right? Like there's a lot of shame that goes into how am I managing my weight? And it's like, oh, you should feel bad. Or if you had just chosen differently, then things would have all been different. And I think we don't appreciate enough how powerful of an impact our environment has on the choices, not only that we make, but even the choices that are available to us.
Right. Well, so I was just thinking about that in the corporate world. It's so interesting to see when we start out in a job. Often we are tasked at a low level with more busy work tasks, things that keep us busy and doing a lot of things. And so we're up and down and moving quite a bit more. As we progress, though, and you move up to that next tier to maybe like mid-level management, your whole day is filled with emails and meetings and things. And so you become much more sedentary. And it's not until you reach upper level management where you have more control of your time again that you can exercise and incorporate some of those things back into your day. So it's really common that we start out in our 20s when you're just starting out in a new job and you're still doing some of those busy work things, that you have an easier time maintaining a healthy weight. And then kind of 30s, 40s, it becomes a little bit more challenging because lifestyle changes and you often have kids and other things, more demands on your time. And so we see a lot of people during that period of time gaining a fair amount of weight. And then 50s, 60s, you kind of your career trajectory changes a little bit. Your kids are grown and gone, or at least able to take care of themselves more, blah, blah, blah. And so you're able to devote more time back to activity and exercise. And we see people often, but not always, lean back out if they've kind of established some healthy habits. But if they haven't, that couple of decades can become really, really a dangerous time where their health falls apart very quickly. And so we see a lot of aging happen during that time when that isn't the case. Yeah. And so it's a natural trajectory of aging. that we see those types of things happen, that during that 30s and 40s, we see our lifestyles slow down quite a bit in terms of activity, because we're busy doing work type things and stuff. And so that's one of the things, if we can fight that during that time and maintain some of those healthy habits, when our time frees up especially, we really can get back to doing that more at a greater volume and see a big health preservation by doing that.
Yeah. So I want to go more into that in just a sec. Let's back up a little bit and talk about what does it mean to have a fast versus a slow metabolism?
Yes.
Where is that coming from? What is true? And yeah, just dive into that a little bit.
Well, so, metabolism, again, is the sum of all of the different processes of our body. And so there's a couple different ways in which that's made up. Some of it is our body composition. So variations from person to person in what our body is comprised of. Is it more fat mass or is it more fat-free mass, like bone, organs, muscle being one of the big energy burners? But actually, our organs, our brain, really comprise a huge portion of the calories that we burn. And so...
Well, so let's talk about that really quick. A figure that often gets quoted is how energy hungry the brain itself is.
Yeah.
So it makes about 2% of our body weight, uses about 20% of that basal metabolic rate. And so really impactful. Muscle and bone together make up about 25-30% of that energy expenditure. But between the liver, brain, kidneys, and heart, that's about 50% of that resting metabolic rate. And those are tiny organ, like in comparison to how much muscle we have versus our organ weight, that's a huge amount of difference in terms of how heavy those organs are versus how much energy they use. And so that introduces a significant amount of variability into our metabolism.
Yeah. There probably is like a factor that you could calculate out about the importance to survival and its amount of energy that it takes up.
Yeah.
Right? Like it'd be, or utilizes, I guess. So yeah, there's variation from person to person. There's obviously some standard amounts of energy from like our heart and our lungs and things like that that are fairly standard from person to person. But then you've got things like muscle fiber types that vary because of genetics, whether that's ethnicity or gender. Both of those things play a factor. You've got hormones, and again, that has a lot to do with genetics and our diet and things.
Stress even has an impact.
Stress, yep. And so our environmental and lifestyle factors, all of those things play into what makes up that resting metabolic or basal metabolic rate. And so it's hard to factor all of those things in an equation. There's just so many variables that can impact what makes up that resting metabolic rate. Hence the reason that we measure instead of calculate. When we measure it, then we know what that value is. When we calculate, we hope we're in the ballpark. I was just talking recently about this very concept with people who do estimates of the resting metabolic rate using bioelectrical impedance scales or handheld devices or, the more advanced devices. And they're always like, why is that number so different than what we get when we measure it? Because it's a calculation. We're factoring in all of these different things, and they often use standards like, well, if they have this percentage of body fat and this percentage of lean tissue, so muscle and other things, well, muscle on average uses this many calories per day and blah, blah, blah. And so it's this calculation. Well, what if your muscle fiber type is different? Or what if your mitochondrial density, because you're sedentary, is a lot lower than somebody else? Then you're not going to have that same rate. And so those numbers can vary quite a bit.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And one of the interesting things about muscle and fat, like both are burning calories, but they actually don't contribute. Like each pound of muscle doesn't add a huge amount more of calories that you're burning. But again, muscle is important for so many reasons. And so what we're talking about, actually, I want to back up. So talk really quick about why the metabolic testing, like when we measure people's breath through a device, how is that actually correlating to what's happening inside the body, right? We talk about measuring in real time and getting the accurate data from them, but how does our breath correlate to kind of those cellular processes?
Yeah, really interesting. So essentially what's happening is when we are processing calories, they need oxygen to fuel the flame. Just kind of like when you light a match, but then put it under a cup, the match would go out because it doesn't have oxygen to keep fueling the flame. Our body, to process calories, needs oxygen. And so by measuring how much oxygen is in the air in the room, and then measuring how much oxygen we're blowing out, we can see the difference in concentration of oxygen, how much oxygen we have consumed, is the term that they use for saying we've used oxygen in burning calories. They call that oxygen consumption. So we can look at how much oxygen you consumed in burning those calories, and that lets us know how many calories then we've burned. And so by measuring our breath, we can look at not only how many calories, but also what type of calories we're burning. The ratio of oxygen to carbon dioxide lets us know if we're burning fats versus carbs, which is pretty fascinating as well. And so with that, we can really dive in and see what somebody's metabolism is doing under different conditions. As we do both a resting test and an exercise test, we can take a look and see how are we burning calories, how efficiently are we burning them in different states of movement and exercise. It's really fun to be able to see for someone's body exactly how their body is processing those calories. It gives us so much insight into where they're at and how their body is taking all of the nutrients that we're giving it and using it to fuel movement, exercise, activity, and all of those kind of background processes like building up our bones and keeping our heart and lungs and hair and skin and nails and teeth and all those things healthy and functioning.
Staying alive, important
Yeah,
for some
living
people.
is for some people.
So no, it's just really a snapshot of what's going on real time in our body.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
there's so much we can do with that. And so to kind of consolidate fast versus slow, because of that degree of variability in all these different systems and tissues of our body, there are some people that, because of that variability, will just burn more energy at rest, right? More than that population average. When we're talking about fast or slow metabolism, it's based on a bell curve, right? We take this whole population of people and kind of on average, what do they burn? And then are you above that? Or are you below that? And so depending on kind of those rates of organ and cellular metabolism, am I going to be a little bit above that population average or a bit above that population average, or am I going to be below that? And so that's really what we're looking at in terms of fast or slow metabolism. But the issue here is, again, we're looking at population data, and when someone's trying to change their body composition, that is an N of 1. And so having that individualized, what's happening in my body real time is so helpful for making the kinds of decisions that are going to lead to better health and longer lifespan. One other thing I want to talk about real quick is, so we've got fast versus slow metabolism. We've also got highly adaptive versus not as adaptive metabolisms. What that means really is that if we're highly adaptable, we can eat a lot more before putting on weight. But conversely, if we want to lose weight, then we typically have to eat a lot less, right? There's big swings in that change. And so it's like, let's say that I want to lose weight and I usually eat 2,000 calories. Right, highly adaptable, I might be able to go up to 2,500 calories and not put on that much weight. But to lose weight, I might have to drop down to 1,500 calories, right? That big swing. Versus someone else who isn't as adaptable, they might, to gain weight, they just eat a couple hundred extra calories, and to lose weight, they drop a couple hundred extra calories. And so there's just, less limited or more adaptation. And one of those isn't better than the other. It's again back to what you said at the beginning. It just is their body. And so you can have a fast metabolism that's highly adaptable or a fast metabolism that's not as adaptable. You can have a slow metabolism that's highly adaptable or a slow metabolism that isn't as adaptable. And so understanding how your body responds to changes is really helpful for guiding what do I do with this information.
Right.
And so now we know, okay, fast versus slow, what's happening there. We know what our metabolism is. Let's now dive in again to what can we do about it? What does this mean for us? And how does this information that I'm getting about my metabolism play into the type of decisions that I want to make?
Right. Well, because with one test, it's hard to tell, do I have a fast or slow metabolism? Well, right now it's below average, but that may not mean that you have a slow metabolism. It may mean that you're just not eating very many calories right now. And so it's slowed that metabolism down. It may, your body maybe have the potential to have a fast metabolism, but under these current conditions. And so it's more about taking somebody where they're at and saying, okay, this is the game plan. This is what we're going to do.
Well, and so for that person that's trying to lose weight, because of that high variability in adaptation, we can do this testing regularly and see, hey, this is how your body responded to this change. This is how it responded to this change. And instead of just having to guess and guess and guess, we can dial in each time and really kind of make this an experiment, right?
Exactly.
We test this variable, what happens, and then we adjust.
Right. Well, that's why it's so important to test and test often, is use that as a vital sign. Again, I've used this analogy before, but if you're hoping to bring somebody's blood pressure down and you're prescribing medications and exercise and all these interventions to bring their blood pressure down, what are you going to do often?
Test.
Yeah, you check their blood pressure and see, is it having the effect that we're going to hope it's having? If we're doing things to change somebody's metabolism, to change their body composition, or several different lifestyle factors around their metabolism, shouldn't we be measuring that to make sure that it's having the desired effect? And so that's the idea, measure and measure often, so that you can detect those changes and so that you can make sure that if I want to do things that help speed up their metabolism, I hate using that term just because it's not about the speed of it necessarily, but if I'm doing things that would hopefully help them have a higher resting metabolic rate and do things that would help them to have more non-exercise activity thermogenesis effect. Strength training, for example, will help you burn more calories during your NEAT, your non-exercise activities, because you have a bigger engine to burn calories. So if you're trying to do that, testing that to make sure you're having that effect is super important.
Absolutely. And then I think diving back into those lifestyle factors also plays a huge role, right? It's what are my behaviors and how am I changing that? You and I have talked about before about how diets run in families.
Yep.
But so do so many other things. Or diseases run in families, but so do diets, so do habits of thinking, behaviors. What do I enjoy doing for recreation? One of the things that I love when I hear about your family trips, Cameron has the best family trips. It's so cool because you're just always moving. It's like, just give us a sample of your typical vacation day.
Well, so last night I was thinking about this. Last night was a great example. So we had, my son is graduating high school and my nephew is also graduating high school. And so really fun. So we had a graduation party for them. So everybody came over and we had dinner and kind of celebrated them. And then right afterward, what did we do? We went and played, it's called paddle tennis. It's kind of like pickleball and tennis and volleyball had a baby. It's a fun sport because you can play it with any age of kid and stuff like that. So we can play up or down. And so that's what we did. At the end, we had everybody come out and we played a sport together. And that's what we do all the time. Our vacations are just one sport to the next, to the next, to the next. We literally will go from wake up in the morning, go to the beach, play in the water and play on the sand. Then we'll play volleyball, and then we'll go to a local basketball court and we'll play basketball, and then we'll come back and play volleyball, and then we'll come, and we just collapse into bed every night, and that's just our family, and it's really fun. It keeps us moving, keeps us active, and centers our lifestyle around movement and activity and being prepared to be able to do that. So often I say I work out so that I can do those things, and I don't work out to lose weight. I don't work out to look a certain way or whatever. For me, exercise is about tuning up the machine to be able to do the things that I love to do, so that those things, my lifestyle, is what helps me to be able to maintain a healthy weight or all of those things.
Yeah. Well, and it's so cool because being a part of your family, you don't even have to think about that. It's just what you do.
It's ingrained, in the culture of the family.
Of the family. And so if we really want to have impacts, like there's so many resources we can use, right? We're not just limited to lifestyle change. There's been some really great, medications that have come on board that can help with body composition changes. But zooming in on those lifestyle factors, if we can just architect our environment and our habits to support the healthiest choices, then it takes so much of the stress and the energy out of doing that. If we just make the healthiest choice the easiest choice, and it's just what we do, it's the culture of our families, then it becomes so much easier. And obviously that can be difficult to change. I look at it this way. The habits you inherited, the family that you grew up with, that just is. And so some of the things that have maybe led to your current health condition aren't necessarily your fault. They are your responsibility. Am I going to do something about that? Given these inputs, given where my genetics and my lifestyle and environment have gotten me to this place, given that, what am I going to do so that I can live the healthiest, happiest, longest life?
Yeah.
And so making small steps, and it doesn't have to be these big, huge lifestyle changes. It can just be small shifts, right? One thing that cracks me up, but I adopted that you do, is Cameron always parks the furthest away from the store, right? It's like, I used to always try to find the closest spot and waste an unimaginable amount of time trying to find that spot. And is that a huge change? No, right? Does it make that big of a difference? I don't know, but it's part of changing my habits. And so now I park far away. And change mindset. Yeah.
Right, that movement is okay. That walking a little bit further is fine. That, I always try to jog everywhere I go too. You'll often see me when I park at the back of the parking lot, I'll jog into the store. Not because I'm in a hurry, just because it keeps me moving. I always say, when people say, I can't move that fast anymore, is it that you can't or that you just stopped? And so when people ask about running or things like that, I always say, I run so that I can run. If I stop running for exercise, I'll lose the ability to run, period. And so I run so that I can run, so that I can still play basketball and volleyball and tennis and pickleball and all those things, and still have the movement and ability to cover the court that I want. And so that's kind of the idea. Not that I'm the pinnacle of health or anything to be emulated, but that mindset of I do this so that I can do all the other things is such a better mindset to have when I made that the focus instead of weight on the scale or other things. It made exercise so much more motivating. I'm not having to I better get my butt out of bed so that I can. Yeah, it's not a punishment. So that I can work off that cheese blizzard that I ate last night. That's not the focus. It's more about what can I do to be able to keep enjoying my life. And that's much more motivating when I think about the next family vacation or the next, time I get to play out in the yard with my kids. That's so much more motivating than, I got to lose these 10 pounds or whatever else.
Yeah, I love that. Well, it reminds me of the story you've told about the guy you knew that climbed Everest, right? I remember you telling me, he's like, just to do it for myself was not enough to get me out of bed each day. It was, I want to set this example for my kids and my grandkids that they can do hard things.
Yeah.
And so having that sense of purpose, that change in long-term goal really changed the approach. And so I think one of the things that we misunderstand, and we all, I'm guilty of this as well, but that our confusion comes from having different goals and different timelines, right? There's so much information in the health and fitness space, and a lot of the confusion comes from that, is mismatched goals, mismatched timelines, and mismatched purposes. And so what is my goal? How do I want to live? Looking at the long game, right? We so often say, I have to make this change, within 6 weeks or 6 months.
Right. I've got a cruise coming up.
Yeah. And understandable, right? It's understandable that we're there. If we're able to just expand that and consider, I've got time. I've got time to change, and I want to do these things so that I can live the type of life that I want to, so that I can enjoy time with my loved ones, so that I'm not just confined to, this very small world as I age, but that I can continue to be engaged in my community, with my family, and focus on the things that at the end of life matter most. Right? When you talk to people at the end of life, they're not concerned with how much money they made. They're not concerned with where they lived. They're not concerned really with so many things about their body. They're like, did I live a life that I'm proud of? Did I spend time with the people that I love? And so if we make those types of things our goals, I think that can change how we view our health as a whole, and hopefully take away some of the stress and anxiety that we often have about our bodies.
Right. So we often talk with people about planning for the 85-year-old you. Stop focusing on the now you and the now effects and results and things. Instead, focus long in the future, and think, what changes can I make now that are small, but that will build toward me being the healthy 85-year-old or 90-year-old that I want to be. I want to still be on the ski slopes. Okay, if I want to be on the ski slopes at 85, what do I need to start doing now to be there?
Well, and there's still room for other goals along the way, right? I want to try to podium at this race, right? I want to do this strongman competition or whatever it is. Like, that's still possible. It's just in context of the larger goal that I can keep living the life that I want.
Or it's just, I still want to be able to roll around on the floor with my grandkids. It doesn't have to be a grand goal even. It can be little
That's
things.
That's a good point. Yeah.
But it can, often those little things are some of the most impactful. We often say that progress is measured in moments, not metrics. It's those moments in your life that really are the most impactful. And so when you can have some of those moments, or you can make those moments the priority. Like, I want to be able to walk my grandkid or whatever down the aisle, or my daughter down the aisle. Like, those types of moments really are huge. And so focusing on those, making those the priority, those future goals, the priority, that really helps keep us on track in the now. And so our metabolism, bringing it back to metabolism, really, again, it's not, is it fast or slow, or how do I manipulate it, or things like that. It's more about tracking it so you can see where it's at, and is what I'm doing having a positive or negative effect, or at least the effect that I was hoping it would have. Sometimes we know that your metabolic rate is going to come down a little bit, and that's okay. If we're losing body mass, if we're losing fat mass, we would expect that because our body has less mass, it's going to require fewer calories. And so that's normal, and we would expect that. So it's not always about getting that number as high as possible. Sometimes we expect some loss in metabolic rate. We just want it to be on par with the efforts that we're making, so that it's not, I've lost 5% of my body mass, but 50% of my metabolic rate. That would not be ideal. Yeah. And so it's just making sure that things are happening the way that we want them to happen. And that's why you, again, test and test often.
Yeah. Well, and that we make sure that we're kind of coaxing the body into adaptation instead of throwing it into alarm mode. I think that's what happens a lot of time, is we take this information about our metabolism, it makes us anxious, and so we feel the need to make drastic changes, and then we drop our body into alarm mode, and it's like, hey, like I've got to keep the lights on, right? Like, I've got to keep the brain going. I've got to keep,
totally
all those processes going. If you're going to rob me of that, like, I'm really going to lock down. And we typically see a much bigger metabolic adaptation when that occurs. And so, again, bottom line is get tested regularly, and then use that testing to make decisions that will positively improve your health. And also, let's say we're looking at losing weight. We can use that to track changes, but also do things that are going to improve our body as a whole.
Yeah,
right?
overall health.
I'm going to do regular aerobic exercise. I'm going to do regular resistance training to make sure that everything's tuned up and working well, and that I give my body the best chance possible to live a healthy life.
Yeah.
Anything to add, or any final big picture takeaways?
So I always try to help people focus less on weight on the scale or a lot of their other metrics, and focus more on, if I do all the things to lead a healthy, active lifestyle, weight loss or body composition or all of those things will be the natural result of that. So getting that resting metabolic rate number is not about stressing over it, making sure I'm eating exactly the right amount of calories or things like that. There's a time and a place for that, especially if we're in a health crisis and need to lose weight more quickly or things like that. But for the most of us where it's that 30, 40 pounds or less to lose, and we're just trying to lead a healthy, active lifestyle, focus on the long-term goal of hey, 10 years from now, I want to be in that ideal body weight. I want to be able to do all the things and blah, blah, blah. If we give ourselves some time and focus on that slowly building and keep tracking our metabolism, and are the changes that I'm making actually having the effect that I want them to, so that we stay on target, we're going to eventually get there where we are leading that healthy, active lifestyle. But if I try to put all of that pressure on myself to do that now today, it's probably not going to happen. So take one bite at a time, if you will, out of this elephant of the healthy, active lifestyle. And as we do that, our metabolism will fall in line and we'll do great.
Yeah. Well, I love that of just, can I take it one step at a time? And can I take some of that anxiety of having to do everything at once?
Right.
I love that. No, I think that was a great discussion and hit on some really great points. Thanks so much for joining us. Remember, if you want more of this content, follow, subscribe, and we look forward to seeing you on our next episode.